Hello.
Hello, everyone.
Good to see you, friends. Great to see you all. How we doing, gang?
Oh, not bad. I mean, it's a nice time of the year. The woods are looking so
Lovely,
yeah.
Jonathan. Dark and deep, truly.
Exactly, and miles to go and promises to keep.
Right.
Yes.
So,
Hello, everyone.
Hello, everyone. For those of you joining us for the first time, my name is Victoria Rose. I am one of the co-founders and operational director of the IBIS Theater.
hey, gang. My name is Luna Alexander. I am the artistic director and one of the co-founders here at the IBIS Theater. So good to see you guys again. Hello.
Hello, everyone. My name's Nick Rowley. I'm the last of the co-founders and the executive director of the IBIS here. And welcome to Beyond the Ghostlight. And the woods are really important to today's episode because we have Brett and Drew Pierce with us.
And can you remind us, Rowley, who are Brett and Drew Pierce?
Oh, there are a couple of lads who did a different kind of movie about things found in the woods called The Wretched. Victoria, you want to tell us a little bit more about The Wretched?
The Wretched was a movie that came out this year, earlier during the pandemic times, not the before times. And it's actually broken a bunch of records. It's like one of those movies that set a precedent because it was released during a time where precedents were being set. And let me tell y'all something. We watched this movie and it was incredible. It was incredible. I was on the edge of my seat. I had a few jumps. I was like, oh! If you were there, you would have heard it and been annoyed probably, but that's okay because it was beautiful and we really enjoyed it.
So great. So excited, y'all. And we're going to be talking to the brothers today because they're from here in Michigan. Whoop, whoop, Detroit and Royal Oak, y'all. So coming back, talking to us, homegrown. And yeah, should we bring them on, everybody?
I think
so.
Drum roll, please. Hey!
Hello!
I wish we would have brought our masks. Yeah. We have one from the movie. Yeah.
You know what? I don't know what mask you're talking about. I was just bursting with excitement to see.
I mean, I've had a little bit of acne here. Oh my God, what is it? What? Wow, what is?
You're cracking, Kelly. Cracking.
Yeah, I know. Lotion. I really must invest in lotion.
Moisturizer.
So, welcome to the both of you. This is delightful that you are here today to talk. And we have a bunch of questions, and I thought we'd have a fun conversation.
Definitely. Our audience, please feel free to type in your questions in the chat. We will get to them. So fire away.
Wonderful. So before we do that, let's get to some questions that we have for you guys. I think this question might be the second most important question we're going to ask you tonight. We're going to lead right off strong. Why are the woods so scary?
Oh man, I mean it's Michigan. It's Michigan's fault. We, Drew and I grew up in Detroit, and we spent our summers going camping in northern Michigan and going up to cabins in northern Michigan. So, like anything, we just became fans of telling scary stories when we'd go on these trips. And I mean, I can't imagine making a movie that doesn't take place in the woods of Michigan. I'm sure it'll happen at some point, but it's from all those camping trips up to Traverse City and stuff like that when we were kids. So.
Oh, Traverse City. I have been there once.
Yeah.
As an adult. The daytime's beautiful.
Yeah.
Nighttime's terrifying. Yes.
Yeah. Looking for woods too. Is Drew and I drove up and down every road of the Leelanau Peninsula, looking for good woods. That was like a really big thing. Like we'd be like, "Does that look like good woods?" And you pull off the road, run deep into the woods, look around and be like, maybe we can put the witch tree here. I don't know.
Yeah,
So,
no,
yeah.
yeah, like a lot of woods, if it just is like foliage and green, it just looks like mush on camera. There's no depth. So you're always looking for those like thick trunk trees that just recede into the distance.
Yeah, I think our producers just always looked at us when we were like looking at trees and running around the woods. We're like, it's woods.
Yeah.
They're all woods. Just pick it, you know. It's
But it's a funny thing when you're a filmmaker in Detroit and you're just wandering onto people's property, just kind of like knocking on their doors and like around their yard.
Yeah.
Just like, hey, can we shoot here?
Yeah. We made sure to wear Detroit Tigers hats so they didn't think we were some weirdo or something.
I love it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the other question that probably comes up and is, very pertinent to this is, siblings. Am I right? Working with your family, growing up with them and everything. What's it like, making films with your family?
Well, I mean, if you have a brother and you're making a film, you're definitely sharing underwear. But I'm just kidding.
It's kind of boring. We've spent so much time with each other. We're like best friends, so we know what we love about film and what we kind of have similar taste for the most part. And we usually have spent so much time together that like by the time we're on set, we've talked through every decision that it's kind of de nauseum that we're almost like one brain. It's kind of ridiculous because we get all these stories back from our actors later where like I go and talk to an actor and then Brett goes to talk to the actor separately and we've both said the exact same thing.
Yeah. I think there's like some sort of like weird psychic connection because it's a little creepy. But I mean, we do have our fights though. I mean, we're brothers, but that's like, our fights aren't on set. They're like months before we're writing the script and like, there'll be something in the script and I'll be like, that's a dumb idea.
Oh, we get petty.
It's like, no, it's a good idea. And then we get like petty and like, each other a little
but the
bit.
good part is, I think, because we're brothers, I think you see like a lot of filmmakers, even if they don't have a sibling, they have like their best friend.
Yeah.
And it's usually because you're so vulnerable when you're filmmaking and you kind of need that like emotional support because you're really putting yourself out there and there's 50 people on set that are judging you. So it's kind of nice to have somebody that has your back and that in those tough moments will sort of tell you if you're being a jerk or whatever, or if you're right. Because in all those moments it's such a tough thing. So
Right. Yeah. And I love that. I mean, I love that you guys mentioned, vacations growing up as kids and running all around the Leelanau Peninsula. Empire is one of my absolute favorite places on the face of the planet because of the
that's where the party, or I call it party store. We have to call it convenience store out here in Los Angeles now. But the party store gas station in the movie is in Empire. So, yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. I love that. And let me ask you, like growing up together, and in general with your films, do you guys pull from the games or stories you guys scared each other with when you were kids for inspiration? Or
I mean, we've always been film nuts. So, and like in a weird way, like we loved horror, but we were both, me more so, we were terrified of horror because our dad was doing the special effects for Evil Dead. And when I was a kid, I snuck down in the basement while they were doing those. And I saw them doing this disgusting meltdown sequence with all this gore. And I was like 2 years old and it like scarred me. Like I my whole life till I was like 14, I was afraid of that basement and I was afraid of horror movies. I thought horror movies, like if you watch one, you die. That was like my mentality as a kid. But I had it at the same time. So eventually I started like, it took me till I was like 15 to watch Evil Dead because in my mind, it was so like awful. But I was after I kind of started watching, we just watch them all the time. But we've always had like, I'm a huge comic book guy, so I love like, especially like Hellboy comics and horror comics. I have a ton of those. I was just reading Harrow County today, which is this really amazing horror comic.
So good.
So yeah, my Stephen King and all that type of stuff, and Drew's always loved that stuff too. So it's
it's our language. It's how we like talk about things. Either Hitchcockian, Spielbergian, or anything. Like
people are always like, you guys are always so happy and nice. Why are you trying to make all this like horrible mean stuff? It's like I don't know. So
good stuff.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of like you. Why do you think I'm so happy and nice?
Yeah. Yeah, I get it out in my creativity.
It's kind of like bikers, though, to be honest. Like, if you meet horror filmmakers, we've met a ton just doing the festival run. They're the nicest. Just horror fans in general are always the sweetest, nicest people. I don't know if they get out their demons and through the experience of watching horror. Same with bikers. Like, our stepdad was always a biker. We'd meet all his friends that are like hardcore, tough-looking bikers, and they're so sweet. You know, they like bake bread and like they're just so chipper.
Yeah, our stepdad was a biker, and he was our craft service guy with our mom on this movie. So.
Yeah.
That's
Nice.
adorable.
They're making coffee. Mom would come around with a tray of like chocolate for everybody. Like, you want some chocolate? You know,
I think it's the people that like comment like rom-coms. Those are the people with real dark souls.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, or like the bikers you find who like, you know, raise Pomeranians or something like that. You know, they have like the tiny adorable dogs. Yeah.
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah.
Perfect.
You know, Tori, I think you had another question kind of coming up, but the Royal Oak, you know, obviously you guys just mentioned, you know, Sam Raimi and working in that terrifying basement. I can't even imagine. I mean, Evil Dead would have been real for you guys. So, you know, I know that one of you guys has worked on Rick and Morty recently, to list a couple of examples.
Actually, we haven't. Drew used to work in animation, though.
Yeah, he did Futurama.
He was on.
I went to school at CCS. You know, we made a bunch of movies and I wanted to be a filmmaker. CCS over in Detroit, and you know, I kind of realized early on, trying to get into filmmaking, that most film schools don't really teach you much about filmmaking. Well, at least any more than I was learning working at a video store, that's for sure.
Yeah.
So I went to art school and just learned how to draw. So that's been my side hustle my entire life, is I do storyboards and animation stuff. So I worked on Futurama for a while, and I've done a lot of features and Hollywood movies and stuff, like storyboarding.
Does a lot of posters for movies.
Yeah, stuff. Yeah, which is cool. But it's kind of like, it's been the best job ever for just as far as like practicing directing. Like, the closest thing to directing without stepping on set is basically storyboarding. You're in the head of all the stages of every shot, every decision, story decisions, and all that stuff. So it's been kind of a fun way for me to kind of get to do the job without having to do the job, which is great.
Raw.
Oh yeah, there is one of your storyboarding projects which we'll come back to in a little bit, but I think Tori, you know.
Yeah, I can. So we just talked about Evil Dead and talking about Rick and Morty. So let's talk about the all the great emphasis on practical effects in The Wretched. Can you talk about the balance of practicals to CGI in this?
Yeah, well, we from growing up around the Evil Dead guys, we were always really big fans of practical effects because of what they did. Plus, just in film, we've always liked the original John Carpenter's The Thing and Fright Night. We loved the effects work in those movies. That we were really insistent we were going to make a witch creature. That's what the movie was going to be, and we wanted her to be done practically. So the movie's like, I mean, it's like 98% practical effects, 2% digital. The creature's never digital ever. It's all Drew actually designed it with our effects artist, Eric Porn, who that's his real name. But they signed the witch together, and we just made sculpts of her, and we found this really great actress based out of Michigan named Madeline Stunkel, who is a dancer too, and she just kind of brought the creature to life. But like, honestly, in the whole movie, like the digital effects are the guy who did them is fantastic and he's great, but it's like the boring stuff you don't notice. It's like, oh, there's a crew member in the chat. Can you paint him out? You know, kind of type thing. Or plus some things like in the opening scene, they there's a babysitter goes down the stairs and there's a kid being eaten and there's blood on the floor. Well, we screwed up on the day of and we forgot to put blood on the floor. So the blood's CG. So in that one point, just on the floor. But it looks great. So, but
we love practical and CG. It just kind of depends on the tool, whatever works the best. Practical tends to be a little scarier whenever you can pull it off. It always looks a little bit better practical. But CG it's better for spectacle usually. It's for like the alien ship or the big thing that's, you know, whatever. But practical, it just, I think even for the actors being on set, if they have something to react to, it just works better. It feels more visceral. Like it usually works better for the scare.
Plus, it's just kind of fun when you're like shooting all day. It's late at night, and we're all looking at the monitor, and all of a sudden you turn around and there's Madeline dressed as this monster, and you're just like, ah! You don't expect she's just like chilling there in a robe with all this like disgusting makeup on. So
Love it. Love it. And, you know, kind of on that note, guys, it's been exciting seeing practicals kind of making a comeback. What are your thoughts about that? Just like in general in the last like 5-10 years.
yeah, it's been great because it went away so much because Hollywood got so CG obsessed. And not that there isn't great CG, but like that became like the only thing. And so many practical effects houses and people kind of went out of business out here, which was kind of a big bummer. But there's been a lot of people that have kind of picked up that torch and started new practical effects companies or started putting I think it's just because we all kind of realized after you can get away with a little bit of CG in horror, but for some reason it kind of breaks the reality and the ability to make something scary if it's too much CG, especially in horror. And you're also dealing with like in horror, it's actually more about what you don't see than what you do see.
Yeah, the real horror is the lead up to the scare for the most part. The actual scare itself usually isn't that scary.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So
it's been great to see them all kind of come. And like the guy that we worked with, it was this company called Bite Mares, and the guy was Eric Porn. He was so excited that we just wanted to do like an old fashioned creature movie and actually make the creature because they don't get that opportunity that much anymore, unfortunately, because the thing Drew and I have realized, we tried to get The Wretched made out here in Los Angeles with some production companies and studios. And the one thing we kept on running into is they would be like, oh, you got a monster in your movie. That's too expensive. That's too hard. So, we can't do it. So we figured out a way to do it. So, yeah.
Seeing that you were saying, so that CG can actually work, what are some examples, not from The Wretched, but like that you've seen where CG actually does work, and you actually like the use of CG?
I mean, Jurassic Park. I still believe dinosaurs are real, and that's early days.
Yeah.
Even
it's also a mix of CG with practical effect dinosaurs, which Terminator. I would say that made that Jurassic Park movie is still more convincing than the later ones. I
think Terminator 2 is another great example that is probably better than if they, for those scenes. There's things that work better. I think the disparity between practical and CG, because people will always want to hate on CG, but it's really because the process of CG is to show people as much as possible a lot of times, and that's unfortunate because the thing that actually makes things scary is our imaginations are scarier than anything we could ever draw or paint or sculpt, right? Or put on screen. So practical, just by necessity, you're trying to hint towards what is there, where CG is show what is there, right? Yeah. So like the when you're filmmaking, when you're trying to tell a story and you're hinting that something is terrifying there and you're just showing pieces, it's so much scarier because our imaginations are actually filling it in.
I think it's also a little bit too from a production perspective of making something is, if you're doing a practical effect, it forces you to really pre-plan what you want to do way before, because you have to basically spell it out to these people so they can build it. With a CG effect, you should still do the same thing, but it does give some people too much wiggle room where they just don't think about the fact that they should figure out beforehand, and then they go shoot something and try to make the effect work within what they shot.
Yeah.
That's not necessarily the ideal way to do it. You really want to if you're going to do a CG effect, you kind of want to treat it exactly like you're doing a practical effect. You just pre-plan what you're doing before you do it. So,
right, very cool. Yeah. So that takes us to something else, which I know Drew you worked on, which is the storyboards for a very practical movie, although I'm sure there's some CG in it as well, which was the Happy Time Murders.
Oh yeah.
And I think there's very few things more horrifying than puppet sex. But
that whole scene was a fun bit to storyboard, actually. Weird, yeah.
But there's also another movie that preceded it that is it's still sort of Muppet type puppets,
We'll talk about
but
Meet
for adults, which was Meet the Feebles.
Yeah.
What do you think of Meet the Feebles? When it, you know, and the way that achieved that, because that's one of the movies that I've watched, and I've watched it a bunch of times because I love that early-ish, you know, Peter Jackson stuff.
Yeah.
And Meet the Feebles is just like this astoundingly weird thing.
Yeah.
And I kind of love that there's actually 2 movies now.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's cool. It's bizarre and creative. I mean, just the thing that's fun about puppet stuff just in general is it's similar to working with practical effects, is you're always trying to pull off sort of this, you know, this imagination, this sort of, you know, extreme sort of world, you know, and it's a blast.
It's all kind of magic tricky too, because there's so much that has to go on set just off of frame to kind of make it work. Like, honestly, I mean, like, you know, Happy Time Murders, they had a good budget. I'm sure Peter Jackson didn't have the greatest budget for Meet the Feebles, and it's pretty amazing. I just still love the fact that the guy that made Bad Taste and Meet the Feebles ended up directing the Lord of the Rings trilogy. Yeah. It's so funny.
That some executive went, yes, that the rat monkey.
Mixed
That's
up the name on IMDb with a different Peter Jackson, then greenlit it, and then realized after he shot the Lord of the Rings, like, oh shit, no.
Beautiful. So now we're just gonna switch gears just a smidgen here, because there's so much great lore in this movie, right? And some of it felt like it could be from like the swamps of the bayou. Other times it felt like you guys might have been drawing on the Wendigo legends of the Americas with some dashes of like Eastern European hags, like the Baba Yaga thrown in. So, can you talk about what actually inspired your future creature?
Well, it started first with, we just wanted to make a witch film, and that kind of came from Drew and I, me reading Hellboy comics and folklore and all these other things, and reading about all these myths about these different witches, and just going, man, there's so many cool witch myths and nobody's really using them. They're always just like, if you see a movie about a witch, it's always like just a woman who's like, I'm a witch and I killed my children, and that's kind of like she's evil or whatever. But I found this witch called Black Annie, or Black Annis, they call her too, and I just really found her super interesting, really liked her. She's kind of a UK myth. She lives like under a tree in a hollow, and she wears like the skins of children on her belt, and it's creepy. Lives in a tree and steals children out of their beds. So it started with that, and I said, hey, I really like this, Drew. And he was like, well, let's look at some other ones, because at first I was like, let's make a Black Annie movie. But he was like, well, I like her, but I want more stuff to do with her. I want to like build out the legend.
We looked at the Baba Yaga. We looked at the Kaliak. We looked at all these other myths. And
Jenny Greenfinger.
For a while, we were actually considering making just a witch. Like, it was going to be one of these characters. Like, that's like examine one witch. But then we fell in love with this other myth about the Boo Hag. And it's basically a skin-stealing witch who assumes people's identities. And we just thought, what a cool opportunity to like have a witch that can basically, you know, essentially infiltrate a home and wear the skin of a mother and steal children. And it just all came together. So we kind of cherry picked those two ideas, Black Annie and the Boo Hag, and just came up with our own lore.
Yeah. I mean, some of it's like drawn. We were just like, we got through the whole thing. We even wrote the whole thing. And then we were like, came up with another rule about she can make people forget people. And that's not from anything. We just liked it so much for the story. And it honestly came from a script problem, because we were thinking like, well, if she's stealing all these kids, everybody's going to know the kids are gone. How do we, you know, kind of thing. We're like, how does somebody get away with that? And I think Drew's like, she makes them forget about them. We're like, oh, that's it. Okay, that's what we're going to do. So, but yeah, like the design of her and even the way she looks is very much based on characters like the Baba Yaga and Jenny Greenfingers and the Black Annie and a bunch of others. And, you know, honestly, it's something that if we ever get to play in this world some more, Drew and I want to draw from some of the other legends we didn't get to touch in this one. So, yeah.
Okay, so that's actually really cool, because, like, you know, obviously I'm not from around these parts. I'm right from the middle of England. So, like, a lot of the things that you're mentioning are things which, Black Annis is a good one. Jenny Greenteeth.
Yep.
You know, that's another good one.
Yeah.
But what are some other stories then that are from the heart of the woods that you find particularly scary that you haven't got to use yet, but like you sort of like maybe having a notebook somewhere and saying, "Got to get back to that."
Stay tuned for the Wretched too.
Yeah.
There's definitely cool, creepy stories and lots of legends that we've heard that we haven't been able to work. We weren't able to work into the Wretched, so some of them were actually saving for a potential sequel. But I mean, there were a couple myths. There was this one myth my friend told us about that we kept trying to crack that I thought was so interesting about this. Basically, how I think this was, I can't remember what country this is, but basically how people would be led out to the woods and in the middle of the night, and they would be led by like a woman, and they'd basically be introduced to their entire family basically out in the woods. And they'd be asked like, do you want basically ancestors that are all dead and they're all dining in the middle of the woods? And like, do you want to stay essentially forever or go back? And if you basically decide to go back, they like devour you or something.
Yeah.
Which is sort of bizarre.
Yeah.
We just thought that was, there's a lot of these cool, weird legends, essentially.
that are tied to like witchcraft or witches and stuff. Like, and Drew and I, there's just ideas that didn't make it into the Wretched that were in earlier drafts. Like, we always loved the idea. Do you guys know what a witch ball is? You ever heard of what that is? It's kind of a way for a witch to curse you. Is they kind of put this thing under your bed that you sleep. You don't know it's under your bed, so it curses you over time and like does horrible things.
Oh, okay, yeah, like a shambles or something like that. Yeah,
like bone and gross stuff, and it's like hair and stuff. And we so wanted to put something in, and it was in early drafts of the Wretched, but like eventually it worked itself. It just didn't fit, but maybe someday we'll end up in another Wretched movie or something. So
nice.
Yeah.
Love it.
That's sort of. Oh, go on.
Go ahead, Nick.
I was going to say it sort of supports a statement we came up with when we were telling stories about never trusting the women in the woods.
Yeah,
because there's always some woods woman.
Yeah. Well, I just love the idea of like, I think some of the fascination with doing this type of stories, Drew and I just like to think that there's parts of the world that we don't completely understand or haven't been completely explored, and that you almost want to believe that like the magic of the old world still kind of exists in the deep recesses of the woods. And that's always kind of like my inspiration for horror. I feel like I'm always trying to write horror movies about the deep woods, like something's out there that we can't comprehend and it's going to come get us, so.
Yeah, love that.
Yeah.
Speaking of the woods, you guys were mentioning earlier how, driving around, trying to find the perfect woods here in Michigan. And kind of expanding on that, what makes filming in Michigan different maybe than anywhere else?
We just love, it's our home state. So it's what we identify with as far as our stories. It's like our roots. So like we know the feeling of we've shot everywhere in Michigan now at this point. Like each city has its own sort of distinct feeling. So it just sort of helps for us. It just feels like home. It feels like where our stories sort of come from.
And you just feel like you're on home court advantage when you go home to make this thing. Cause it's so hard to make a movie, but to kind of be in your comfort zone of where you're at. But it is because also Michigan has so many unique looks to it. And we've actually gotten so many compliments from people that see the movie. They're like, where did you shoot that? What is this place? I'm like, it's just Michigan.
Yeah.
It's not not so far away. There's a lot of beautiful, wonderful places. And we just like, it kind of all started with just, we knew we wanted to do this Woods Witch movie. So we were like, we're going to shoot it in Michigan. And then Drew went back. His in-laws live near Traverse City in the Leelanau County. And he went back and he was driving around with them, hanging out. And one day he went to this marina because they teach sailing at that marina. They do the sailing school for all the kids. And Drew just calls me. And at the time we were writing the movie. And I think like earlier in it, like, Ben, the main character's dad, was a sheriff. And Drew's like, let's have his dad run the marina because this place is beautiful and it looks great. So it was this piecemeal thing of like, we got this cool marina. It looks beautiful. It's Michigan. The two houses in the movie were us driving around, and it was in Omena, Michigan. That's in that county. And it was just these two houses on a hill that are a bed and breakfast. And we were like, that just looks so cool. Let's see if they'll let us shoot there.
Yeah. When you're making a movie, you're always like striving for like truth and like specificity. So like anytime, it's hard to know, like if I was making a movie about like London or something, and I've been there a handful of times, but to know what it feels like to live in that city and what it feels like to wake up and walk around, all those things, like the smell and the taste of a place. If you can find little details and put those into a movie, it feels so much more real, and like people can just feel it when they watch it. And I think that's why it just feels so much easier to shoot stuff there, because we know those details. We know what it's like to be in the woods in the middle of the night. We know what it's like to live, or stay in those kind of cabins and stuff.
It's definitely Michigan too, because at the marina, Tim Allen's boat was parked there.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's a blast. We love it's fun to we've been in LA for about 15 years now, and it's so much fun for us to go home, and it feels like going to camp. We have all these creative people we pulled them from all over. We had locals, but we also had people from LA we've met. We had people from New York, and you sort of like are grouped up in this small community. And to shoot a movie, you feel like you're doing something against the system. You feel like you're rebelling. It feels exciting.
Yeah. Well, here's the great thing: is our stunt guy, Danny Ray Cook, did a great job for it. He lives down near Lake St. Clair Shores. That's where he lives. He came up there and he'd never been up there, and he's actually from London. He's British too, but he came up there and he loved it so much that I think he just bought a house up there and he just moved up there in the last month.
Nice. Yeah, he let us light him on fire when we were like 17 years old. We've been doing. It was a blast to have him come work on.
He was like a stunt guy in James Bond movies he moved to Michigan because he met a girl here, and all of a sudden had no work because he's in the middle of Michigan after being in the UK making stuff. And he's like, "Hey, I got this Zell gel suit. You guys want to set me on fire? It's about to expire." Yeah.
I'm going to use that as a segue because that's a perfect segue. Speaking of that wonderful story, do you have any good shout outs or stories from the towns that you shot in?
Oh, well, I mean, it was weird for Drew and I because like those two houses, we felt like we didn't get to leave the driveway because like we stayed in them. Drew and I stayed there while everybody else got to go stay in Traverse City in this like hotel on the water. And Drew and I, like the cars would all pack up at night. It's all busy. We're all shooting. And it's like dead silent. We're in the middle of nowhere, just
dead
like looking
silent,
at each other.
And we'd each be in our own house, like in the upstairs where there's like just creaky floors. You're kind of we live like we were by ourselves.
I got creeped out all the time when I was there. Like, so I mean, it was great. We, of course, we had good times. We were there too. But like our experience of making the movies, I saw those two houses, and at the bottom of the driveway, just off those houses, is like a little place to get fish and chips called The Knot. So I spent all my time either eating fish and chips at The Knot or inside the house planning a movie.
So, nice.
But it was fun. So.
Yeah, I wondered about that with the houses, whether they were, because when you film something, you can make it look like there's nothing around, but if you pulled out the camera, there's like a whole downtown or something. But like, I wondered.
Well, it's a super tiny town called Omina. It's really cute. And those two houses there's actually 4 houses on that property owned, and they're like a bed and breakfast. The big main yellow house that the witch lives in, that's the bed and breakfast. But so we just would, the 2 extra houses got used for a little bit of shooting, but we would put the hair and makeup people in one and the wardrobe in one. So it became like this staging area. But, you go right down the hill and it's just like, fish and chips, the post office, and
I love it. Quick question for you guys. What's the last movie that made you jump? That really spooked you?
Trying to think. I've watched some. It's awful because I don't get scared anymore. I hate it. I've watched too many horror movies.
It's so rare.
I got creeped out watching Host on Shudder recently.
Yeah, I watched that the other day. That was
a lot of fun.
Good one.
Trying to think what else.
Yeah, it's been a while since I've gotten scared. Like scared. It's pretty creepy.
Yeah.
That one got me a little bit.
That's unfortunate. You watch too many horror movies. Like
how the sausage is made.
Yeah.
Every once in a while. Yeah.
I love it.
So, we have a lot of friends who are fans, and when we're putting together questions, some of them will throw them at. And there's one question that I think is a fairly common one, which is, was there just the one witch, or were there multiple? Ooh, yep. Spoiler time, people. Or was there just the one witch, or maybe were there multiple witches?
Do you want a definitive answer? Do people really want it? No.
I don't know. I mean,
Yeah, the truth is, I think part of it, especially with like the ending and with the movie, is we kind of like leaving things open-ended because it's always more interesting to end something with questions rather than answers. I think we learned that from The Graduate, 30 years ago.
Yeah.
We definitely have a definitive answer in our head. But
to be continued. How about that?
I respect it, man. I really do. And it goes back to what you said before about the best monsters are the ones that you make in your brain.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
and we gave a definitive answer to one screening on the festival run, and the festival guy comes up to me and he goes like, "Don't do that. You have the best way to not tell people this answer. It's way better that way." And I was like, "Okay, we're never saying what we think." Yeah.
Never saying what you think. I don't know. I don't know if that's necessarily words to live by, but we'll go with it now.
Just in this case, yeah.
Well, we do still have a few more questions, so we do want to know what you think. Yeah. So with the movies coming out in the next season, what movies are you guys looking forward to with this next set of movies?
Man, I want to see Quiet Place 2. I'm excited about that one. Yep. I want to see Antlers.
I really want to see Antlers. That looks amazing.
You and I were glad when they moved that one because we kept on seeing promotional materials for it. And we're like, that kind of looks like our movie.
We're excited for Fast 9 because our buddy wrote it from Detroit. Dan Casey, shout out.
Yeah.
That got postponed a while though.
Those are probably the ones I'm looking forward to the most though. I'm trying to think. Oh, I want to see Candyman too. So
So excited.
Yeah.
The trailer was amazing.
Yeah, well the trailer was awesome. Yeah. And I think there's this isn't a movie, but I'm such a sucker for Chucky movies, but there's gonna be a Chucky Child's Play TV show, and I do want to see that. So. Yeah.
There is? Wow. I actually didn't know about that. That's
well, it's gonna be like they did the remake and they're gonna do the remake, but the TV show is gonna be the original Chucky. So
and I'm excited to see not horror at all, but you guys are a theater company. It's West Side Story. Spielberg's gonna do West Side Story. I'm just curious to see what he does with that.
Yeah. I just miss movies.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Us too.
Yeah.
Yeah. So with the filming and everything, it's a difficult time. With all of the social distancing and the fact that I've seen a number of productions that restarted up and then they slammed back down because people ended up with COVID on set. How has that been going? Because we ask a bunch, but
it's kind of it's a really weird time out here in LA because kind of nobody really knows. They figured out ways that they think to make the situation safe, and I've actually seen productions around town shooting, and they are being very careful in a good way. But I do know that the hard part for them is it's adding for every production that's made, their budgets are going to be about 15 to 20% higher because of dealing with safety measures. So that makes it really hard on guys like Drew and I who want to make another film. There's a certain budget, they're happy doing that for a Marvel movie or Jurassic Park 19, but for a $5 million horror movie or something, they're like, oh, now it's too expensive, kind of thing. Yeah. That's the tricky part, but hopefully things get better here at some point so that we can, those things can kind of keep happening again, so.
No, I get that.
Yeah.
And it is, I can imagine how tough it's just been trying to make things work. And I know there's a lot of young, aspiring filmmakers here, actually in Michigan, kind of following the same steps, making things in their basements, figuring out ways to do it, safely, right, with friends. Any thoughts or words for our young up and coming directors here in Michigan? Maybe some inspiration for them to think about.
Yeah, well, I mean, since we're all kind of locked down anyways, and it's really hard to make something, like the one thing Drew and I realized the most is that like the one thing that you do have is you have time to write and rewrite and get something to a really good place. There are so many productions go into production with a script that like maybe isn't great yet, or isn't in the best shape it can be. So if you can't shoot right now, that's okay. Just like, write a script, rewrite it like crazy. Let all your friends read it. Find other people who are writers that will give you criticism and listen to that criticism. And like, because that's the one thing that's free, that doesn't cost a lot of money. What's really expensive is shooting a movie, because you got to pay for everybody to be there and feed them. And like, you got all the things you rent and all the things you have to do. It's like, you can make them cheaper, but when it kind of comes down to the bare knuckle stuff, you still got to pay for some things. So that's what gets expensive. But in the writing process, like you can spend a year trying to get that script to be awesome. Write 10 drafts of it till it gets to a good place. That's the best thing. Because a lot of people, I think, and I feel this way too. I finish a first draft and you're like, oh my God, I finished. That was so hard. And then you kind of go, you just want to be done. But you're like, you read it, you're like, this kind of sucks. You gotta like be critical and let other people be critical.
There's actually
too.
kind of this window right now too, because I mean, I don't know how many people in your guys' audience are if they're trying to put something together right now, but studio films, it's a lot of people, and the mid-range is kind of the group that can't shoot right now. The people with $100 million can shoot because they have the wherewithal to like put together safety precautions. You can also shoot something with like 4 or 5 friends. If you quarantine together and you shoot a movie, they did it like Host. I don't know how big of a crew they had, but that's the thing that released on Shudder, and it's an amazing, simple movie. It's all on Skype or on like a social chat. It's all about the story. And if you can actually make something with a handful of friends, and if the story's great, that's the hardest part though. And the key to making the story work, and I have this guy, but we just tell each other the story beats and if we don't love something, if we're not so excited about it, we keep telling it. And you can tell when somebody's engaging or caring about what you're telling them, like the story. That's really the hardest thing, to be honest, in filmmaking. It doesn't matter what camera you have or how much production value you have, is can you tell a story to somebody and have them actually like be on the edge of their seat or be engaged with what you're telling them. And that's the biggest challenge. If you can do that with your friends and try and get a crew of 4 together and try and shoot something really low budget, and find a cabin or some friend's house that's abandoned and go shoot something right now. It's a good time. We all have a lot of free time right now. So
That's true. We have a couple of questions which are in the thing. So Tracy, hi Tracy, asks what scares you and how much do you draw on that in your movies. And I think we've talked a little about that, but I'm also interested, building on that, so clearly the woods and isolated places are, a pretty good theme. Yeah. What other things are scary to you that like maybe, a different kind of scare that like, is there for you that
the thing that scares me the most, and it's in the movie a little bit, but it's when people essentially are pretending to be nice, but secretly they're evil. Like that, those scenes always get me when you find out that somebody chats somebody up in a movie and then they leave and they realize that they've been dead for 20 years. Like those kind of moments where you're just like, ooh, like they actually have malevolent, intentions, but they're acting nice or coy. What's the strange or weird?
Are you talking about Funny Games?
Funny Games freaks the hell out of me. Have you seen the remake of Funny Games?
And the original's good too.
But these these frat boy sort of or whatever, whatever they're called. They basically are just like they're acting so nice, asking to borrow eggs, but secretly they have these terrible intentions. That freaks me out, like to the core.
What freaks me out, and I like in movies or just in stories, and this is like my own brain thinking, is that like I love horror movies, but I don't believe in supernatural things for real. I kind of want to a little bit, but like there's that moment that I love in movies, but I also feel this way like late at night when you're alone and you're like, yeah, those things aren't real, but just a 5% of your brain's a little freaked out and thinking something that shouldn't be real is real. That's what gets me nervous. And I want to try to express that in a movie at some point, so we'll see. So
for us, and I'm such an analytical person, but we always try to look at our scares like what puts the character in a more helpless situation. We're all wired as sort of like cavemen brains, we all take stock of like, how close is that door to him? Could somebody come from there? Like we're all so wired for survival that it's all about trying to push your character into the most helpless situation. And the more interesting reasons that you can come up with to do that, the more unique and special your horror movie. That's basically the key to it. That's like
exactly why everybody loves zombie movies.
That's why, but that's why we see the same scene where somebody reaches underneath their bed slowly, or like, or the lights shut off. It's just putting somebody in a more helpless situation. But the most unique movies, the best horror movies, I would argue, are the ones that do it in a way that we haven't seen before, where you don't like, oh, that's a new kind of helpless situation I haven't seen,
Love it. Love it. And real quick, let me just ask, siblings, brothers, who's the older brother?
Me. 2 years older.
I'm watching though.
Yeah.
Clearly, yeah. There you go, Bridget. We've got it.
Gary, those questions and comments. You guys, this has been so much fun. We're coming to the end of our interview, and there is a question that we ask all of our guests, because it's the thing that brings us all together, right? Horror. It's the thing that is the reason we're here. So, gentlemen, what made you fall in love with horror?
Oh, boy.
Oh, jeez.
I think so many things, so many films, so many things. But I think it's that dare aspect of when you're a kid, and it's like, how can you watch this movie or not? Like, and for me, it was it was Nightmare on Elm Street, the first Nightmare on Elm Street. Just people, my friends, like I was too scared to watch it, and like, will I be able to watch it? And are you going to watch the second one? Like that kind of like that feeling of like, this is dangerous. Like, I think got me.
Yeah. And I think
excited.
I fell in love with the movie that, like, I mean, I love all horror, but the original Halloween is my favorite horror movie. And it's just, there's such a simplicity in how terrifying that movie is to me, when it's really just about a guy wearing a mask chasing somebody with a knife. But I love it so much. And I think I've always been trying to make something that scares me in the same way with something that I make. So that's what really made me like absolutely 100% fall in love with horror. So.
Love it.
Do you think your love of Halloween then influenced a little bit of that opening prologue scene? Because Halloween starts with the tiny Michael Myers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, there's a lot of influence of Halloween in that movie, and very clearly Fright Night. But those are two big favorites that really influenced the movie.
We made our DP, and he had seen it before, but rewatch Halloween with us right before we shot, and just talking about like John Carpenter. They don't do this style of filmmaking anymore, but these long takes that just drift back and forth with characters that make you feel isolated and creeped out, Yeah,
it's just something we wanted to emulate and try, just because what they kind of do now in horror movies, and I'm not picking on any horror movies. There's some horror movies that are great that do this, but next time you watch a horror movie and you realize like maybe it's not so good, see how much they're editing, how often they're editing. If they have to edit a lot, they're covering up the fact that it's not working that well. If they don't have to edit too much, it's just feels methodical and like it's building suspense.
Yeah, horror movies, the thing about horror movies, they're the hardest, I think, of like most of the genres, because everything, the rhythm, the pacing, the shots, the sound design, everything kind of has to build in a certain way to actually pull off a scare or make people feel creeped out. So it's one of the most challenging things.
Yeah. That's the reason we want to make it, because it's like the hardest thing to make. The best part, it's the hardest thing to do is actually make a good horror movie and make it scary, but it's the least respected genre. But I think it's the hardest thing to pull off.
I don't know about the least respect.
No, it's gotten more respected in the last 10 years.
Okay, so there's probably horror movies, then there's like porn and like
Drew and I always get like annoyed because we go on pitch meetings all the time now for other stuff, and I like a lot of these movies, but everybody's like, elevated horror, we want it to be elevated, and I'm like, are you saying Nightmare on Elm Street and Child's Play aren't good horror because they're not elevated? You know, so it's a bone to pick with me because I love fun horror too. It doesn't all have to be highbrow, you know. So
agreed, and that's part of like who we are as well as a theater company is we're horror and comedy theater.
Oh, okay, nice.
So we like to have that camp as well. We like to have that because that's part of what I fell in love with horror about. You know, I grew up on Stephen King and Stephen King movies, so The Shining, Langoliers, the whole nine. All of those movies, the originals, I love them, and the practicals that came in, and the storyline was always so mentally stimulating.
Yeah,
your brain just go So I can call that elevated horror because to me the only thing that wouldn't be elevated horror is straight up slasher and and even that still love that.
Yeah. Well, I always even say like I like a really good bad horror movie too. Like I'll watch the worst one in the world and have the best time watching it just because it's like sometimes you want a bad horror movie, you know. So it's great. So.
Yeah, and we love comedy too. Our first movie was a comedy, basically.
Yeah.
Masquerading as a horror film. It's like a zombie road trip buddy comedy.
Yeah.
Well, it's a fine line. It's a fine line.
Yeah, it is. Laughs and scares are pretty close to the same thing. Sam Raimi, he's a big Three Stooges guy. Like that's his thing. He never wanted to make a horror movie. He actually saw Halloween, and his producer convinced him like this is a better sort of avenue for us to get, you know,
something made.
And
he was like, "Oh crap, this is really good. I'll never be able to make something this good."
Perfect.
Love it.
Well, guys, it's been a wonderful time. We've sincerely enjoyed having you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh yeah, thanks so much for having us. Just happy to talk to other Michigan folk.
Yeah, guys, take care.
Stay healthy out there, guys. Thanks, appreciate it.
Stay safe, guys. Bye.
We'll see you out there next time, guys. Thanks for joining us on Beyond the Ghostlight. We saw you, Trace. We saw you, Bridget. And those of you who we didn't see specifically, we know you're out there. And we know we love you. And we know you love us. So we'll see you guys next time on Beyond the Ghostlight.
Thank you, everyone.
Beyond the Ghostlight.